Hi guys, welcome to the latest episode of the On the Head podcast. We're joined by Professor Siobhan O'Neill. Siobhan is a professor of mental sciences in Jordanstown. Hi Siobhan, how are you?
Hi, I'm really good. That's great to be here. Happy Tuesday, everybody.
Just give our wee listeners and myself and Vincent an outline of what it is that you do and what your role is in every day in terms of what your work would be.
Sure. Yeah. So my title is professor, and really that means that I do research as well as teaching, and I lead research. So I would teach psychology students and master's students, and the courses that I teach are around forensic psychology. I've got a module. I talk to them about suicide and trauma and suicidal behaviour and stuff like that. And then I teach in a master's in health psychology, where I talk about social constructions of mental illness and things like that too. And a lot of my time though is spent doing research, and that means getting in grants to run research studies, but then also writing up research papers and working with teams of researchers and leading teams of researchers on projects. And there's lots of projects ongoing at the minute, which we maybe get a chance to talk about. But one of the most important things in terms of my career was my work in 2005 to 2008, where I was involved in the Northern Ireland Study of Health and Stress, where we looked at mental illness in the Northern Ireland population and mental health and trauma and suicidal thoughts and behaviours. And that was one of the first studies that really identified the high numbers of people suffering here from mental illness and the effects that the Troubles had on everybody in Northern Ireland. And since then, I've been involved in big studies of suicide here. I looked at over 1,600 suicide deaths a few years ago. And my current work, I work with Samaritans at the minute, doing some work around suicide prevention priorities here, and also helping them better manage the calls that come through and the volume of calls and COVID at the minute, analysing that and looking at different call clusters. I work on projects relating to chatbots for mental illness. I've got a big project at the minute with Action Mental Health, a European project where we're running resilience programs. I did some work on college students' mental health, even some DNA studies where we looked at biological factors associated with mental illness. So lots of research going on, and lots of irons in the fire that way. So my days are really busy between meetings, writing more now, but also talking and developing projects and doing research.
Okay. Obviously, as this is a local podcast, the Troubles and the relation of mental health does come up a lot, and obviously that's part of your research. I know a couple of our listeners have been on to Vincent, and they've asked him to ask you a few questions in around that. Vincent, if you want to go ahead and jump in.
Yeah, well, they didn't so much ask me to ask you questions. They're just interested, and the big thing that keeps coming up is the sort of intergenerational trauma, and they were wondering, does it actually pass down? Maybe that's not your remit. Could you open up a wee bit more about how trauma seems to pass through generations of families that have been troubled by conflict in their areas, be it here or in other places?
Yeah, absolutely. The study I spoke about, the 2005 study, found that 39% of the people then had witnessed or been involved in an event or an incident that was related to the Troubles. Now, that's huge. That's 40%. And we didn't realise that. And 1 in 5 people had seen somebody dead or seriously injured. And the other traumas include riots, feeling that you were in a region of terror, living with ongoing terror and fear and danger, right? So that was pretty significant. And that study showed us that we had the highest rates of post-traumatic stress disorder, because it was a worldwide study where we used the same methods in each country, and our rates were the highest for PTSD. So that for us was really, really shocking. But that was 2008, right? So now we're sitting here in 2020, where we have some of the highest suicide rates in the Western world, in Northern Ireland actually, particularly in Belfast. and deprived areas, and we know that rates of mental health problems in that younger generation who wouldn't be part of that 39%, who would never have, witnessed anything directly even related to the troubles, that their rates of mental illness are really high too, and suicidal behaviour is really high as well. And there is a link, and the link is, there's many different layers to it. Probably the most important thing there is growing up in a family and a community where there's trauma and mental illness that's related to the troubles. So having a parent with a mental health problem, unfortunately, increases your risk of having a mental health problem too. And it's just because that environment that you grow up in, there's more adversity for you. So the most common adversity in 2008 was poverty, and that's still the case. So poverty and inequality result in stress that's associated with mental illness. So mental illness is it results from a stress that you can't cope with, that's ongoing, that erodes your mental health. And poverty and inequality is probably the biggest thing that we're facing in Northern Ireland, and that's a legacy of the troubles. But then you also have parents with maybe post-traumatic stress disorder. And part of PTSD is hypervigilance and anxiety all the time. Living with one or two parents that has that can really, it can really impact on a child's development as they're growing up. It really can. It can impact on those relationships between a parent and a child. And it's those relationships in the early years that promote that kind of resilience, that help people cope with stress as they get older. So it's stress, but also how you cope with that stress. But if you've been raised in a nice, calm environment, then with really positive relationships with your caregivers, then you'll be well placed to cope with any stress that comes your way. And there'll be less stress coming your way as well because of the way you are. You're more relaxed and calmer and everything, and you're able to form relationships and work your way through better. So the biggest thing is the impact of trauma on family relationships being a parent and a child, and then that environment, that context. So a lot of people that were affected by the troubles actually took to drink and substances, and there's a lot of kids now growing up and they've been raised in families where that was an issue, where mum or dad had a drink problem, and it wasn't their fault at all, absolutely not their fault. It was the way they had of trying to cope with what was happening around them. But that has created then a problem for that next generation. The good news is there's lots we can do, particularly if we can get in there early. And, even despite all of those problems that we identified there, most people, about 70% in Northern Ireland, were really low risk of developing mental health problems. So even people with trauma, even people with poor relationships in their families, had still low risk. But unfortunately, if you've got that community, family, trauma, and the effects of that, can result in mental illness in children. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
There's also the people talk a lot about the biological link, which is very, very interesting as well. So there's this idea, if you're living in a world where there's trauma everywhere, your stress response is sort of shifted, and you're more easily activated. You're more hypervigilant. We call it more reactive. You get activated more easily in the face of stress, because it's a good thing when you think about it, because you can run away and fight, and your body's preparing you for that world. But there's some evidence that can even be passed on to the next generation, that reactivity, that stress reactivity, so that the children that you produce, particularly if they're growing inside you, whenever you've got, you can imagine like that biological, it's constantly impacting how their brains develop, and their brains been shaped for this world where they need to react quickly and run away to survive. So there is that adjustment that might be passed on, but it's not a gene as such. It's about the chemical changes to the surfaces of the gene. We talk about methylation and epigenetics. It's those sorts of processes, which means it can be reversed. If you get in there early, you can actually, because the brain's growing so fast in those first 3 years, if you get in there early, you can help shape that child's stress response and calm it down. And good relationships in childhood make a wild difference to that. So that's where the transgenerational trauma comes in. It's about creating a community where there's less inequality as well, though.
Yeah. There's obviously other factors, and we don't want to just be Troubles focused. The Troubles did this, the Troubles, because there are a million other factors, in my opinion. So if it is passed through generations, and this is a conversation I had earlier, I'll just have it with you and see what you think.
Sure.
How far do we go back then? So the Troubles were 69 to whatever. and some people will argue that maybe there's still some elements of the Troubles happening now. Do we go to 1916? Do we go before that with Wolfe Tone and the Young Irishmen? How far do we go back if this is going to pass through? You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a really, really interesting question, and they talk about different cultures having the way we've evolved, like from the famine even, how our bodies set down weight, how we're eating more in a pandemic right now. Is that because of those genes that were passed on years ago that allowed us to survive in a famine? Because we got the food into us when it was there. I don't know. I don't have a simple answer, but we are a product of generations of evolution. It's an amazing thing. I think the most important thing, though, is to know that what we do when we have a little child and when we have a child in the school, what we do with that child can make a huge difference to whether that's passed on and what's passed on biologically, and even more importantly, in our relationships with each other and our children. So that's the thing that promotes really good mental health that we can change, and that's sort of what we need to focus on, I think.
So you think that it's a focus more so on not the cause, but on what we're going to do now to treat or prevent? So I work in a school, so I'm working with kids, and a lot of the things that we talk about now, I would be sort of semi-interested in epigenetics, how your genes can switch on and off with regards to your environment. But a lot of the environment stuff that I've read comes hand in hand with sort of attachment theory. Is there anything that's Troubles related that then causes a negative environment, which then the attachment theory has then mental health problems or causes down the line with kids?
Yeah, attachment theory is this idea that, again, it's based on the relationship between a primary caregiver and a child, and that strong attachment where that child grows up knowing that there's somebody there that really loves and cares about them, and they can be more relaxed as a result. And whenever, if you look at the way attachment works, it's about co-regulation. So the mother or the father or the caregiver calms the child down by touching, by rocking, by doing all those things. And it's setting up neurological pathways that keep that child calm whenever they're faced with stress because of that environment. So it is attachment theory in action. And unfortunately, when someone's suffering from a trauma, they can shut themselves down emotionally. We call it avoidance and numbing as a way of managing how the trauma has affected them. And that can compromise that attachment, that can get in the way of those solid relationships. People feeling, you've young people feeling never were really able to connect with a parent, when they didn't feel that with their parent. And that does affect your mental health as you grow older, but you only need one good attachment figure, and it doesn't have to be the perfect parent. It's just that bond needs to be strong enough, and the child's needs need to be met at the time when the child's brain's developing. So attachment theory definitely is part of it, and the difficulty is with the Troubles. People that were so affected by the Troubles and had trauma-related reactions had difficulty forming those connections, and maybe drank and took drugs and stuff as a way of trying to manage how they were responding. So that's kind of the link in terms of the Troubles. Does that make sense?
Yeah, perfect sense. I'm just thinking, I have a family member who was sort of heavily involved in the Troubles. And when you're saying that, he wouldn't have drank or he didn't, but he was sort of, I don't want to offend him if he's listening, but sort of like emotionally, he wouldn't have really been there, very much a man's man, sort of macho figure. And you can sort of see in my relationships with him what I believed it was to be a man. It distorted my perception of masculinity. And I think that a lot of the problems, maybe PTSD, but another thing for me, particularly with men, is that it's sort of these outdated, warped ideas of masculinity, I think, do cause some mental health problems. It's something that I wanted to touch on with you. Is there anything in your research? I know I've read some stuff about unemployment, and the rates all seem higher for men that commit suicide. Like 2/3 of them, I think, are out of employment, or 1/3 are in employment, so it's the same. And I was wondering if that tied into your whole idea of being a provider. I'm a man, I'm supposed to provide for my family or my children. Is that something that you might look at?
Yeah, it's something that certainly has come up in our studies. Suicidal behaviour is quite interesting. Men, 3/4 of the suicides are men. It's devastating. It's taken our men, and it's just absolutely heartbreaking. It's the biggest killer of young men, and it's just so hard, because in a lot of those cases that they had never asked for help and there was no prior signs. So we have a pattern where men just take their lives in their first attempt and die by suicide in their first attempt. And a lot of the data we've collected over the years in Northern Ireland kind of points to that idea of troubles exposure, to be very technical, but it increases the likelihood that you'll die by suicide in your first attempt. You will not be. So when we ask about suicide attempts, it's not a factor, because they don't attempt. They die in their first attempt. This is the pattern that we've found through the studies. And suicidal behaviour it's a behaviour, and it's important to know that it's linked to mental illness, but it's about much more than mental illness. It's about your place in life, whether you feel your life has meaning, and your role is an important part of that. And a lot of the talk in Northern Ireland is about mental health services as the answer to suicide, but a lot of cases, the people who are very suicidal, if you have an honest conversation, they'll say, I'm not mentally ill, I just want a decent life, and it's kind of my choice to do this. A lot of people would say that this is not an illness that I have, so we need to really think about going beyond mental health services and thinking about why men are so dissatisfied with their lives. And there's another theory as well that links in with this, and that's that if you have a lot of exposure to violence and trauma in the world around you, and even through things like computer games, if it's all violence that you see, your reaction will be that of violence towards yourself. Whenever you're in that place, you'll be more easily able to do what's necessary to take your life, to harm yourself. And of course, if you've self-harmed, then the ability that you'll have to act on those suicidal thoughts is just massively increased. So it's one of the reasons why vets and doctors and people in the army, because of their exposure to death, they seem to be more likely to act on those thoughts, which is it's incredibly sad. But if you put that together with what we've been talking about in terms of stress reactivity and hypervigilance, and reacting, that kind of, I'm going to go and do something now, so something's happened and I don't have that calmness about me, I'm not able to think things through, and everybody around me is, all the talk is of suicide. That's a very powerful thing as well. This is what people like me do, it's what people around here do. We put all those things together, we find men acting in a crisis and taking their lives because they know how to do it, they know other people who've done it, and they're able to do it. So there's a lot. It's a jigsaw, if you like, and how we talk in the media about suicide is part of that jigsaw, and what options we give men, and then what options in society, education, employment, all of those things, and then mental health, mental illness treatments definitely are in there as well. But it's a complete picture. Sorry, I need to go for a second. There's somebody at my door.
You're okay.
Hello. Suicide is. Okay, so suicide is a behaviour. It's something people do when they're faced with a crisis. And there's a whole lot of things that feed into that behaviour. Mental illness can be part of it. But sometimes that's very mild mental illness. There's other things like employment, person's role, their relationship breakup. It seems to be a big factor. Not getting access to your children, having those relationships taken from you, all of those things can make you feel that life's not worth living. So that feeling, and then knowing how to do it, and knowing other people that have done it, and being told that people like you do this, and this is common in your area, that all in place whenever things get really bad, including that hypervigilance, that stress reactivity. that's why it's so sad when we see young people who've no history of suicide, but something happens and they go and do something because they've access to a method, and the discourse, the chat all around them is that everybody is dying by suicide, and that's so common, and it does influence how people behave as well. So the media are part of that as well as everything else.
I'm glad you said that. Sorry, Doctor, just ties right in. I'm glad you said that, because I read something a wee while ago about school shooters in America and the reporting in the terms of how they're reported, in terms of like death tolls and loner type personalities that they push forward, and they sort of glorify it. And this guy that I read was counterintuitive, and he was saying that we need to localize it. You shouldn't really talk about it. Don't really put it in the media. Put it in the media as respect to the family if they want it. And that's it. Because basically what they're doing is they're giving these loner type personalities a strategy. They're overpopulated, and it becomes an option for kids like that. Mm-hmm. Is that something that you think suicide is sort of similar happening here? You hear it nearly every day now on the news that
suicide can be glamorized. And it can seem like a good option. It really can. I mean, there have been surveys of how young people view social media discussions about suicide. There's a set of media guidelines that Samaritans and other organisations have put together, and things like displaying photographs of the person who's died can increase, the likelihood that others will do that. Referring to the suicide as having achieved something for that person is also really quite harmful too. A really good example is the 13 Reasons Why Netflix series, where suicide was shown, and they actually showed the method, and that's something we shouldn't do, because you're giving that person information, that is the final piece of the puzzle. They know how to do it, and they know what to do. But not that alone. They actually showed what suicide has achieved. And they showed the method, as I said, and there was a lot of warnings at the time, and of course it did lead to an increase in suicide deaths, and it seemed that people identified with the character and were able to see themselves in her, and therefore that influenced what they did. Even in Ireland, there was an increase in presentations to hospitals of people during that time, during the couple of months after that was first shown, with the same sort of injuries that led to Hannah's suicide. So these things are really important. Robin Williams' death led to an increase in males of the same age using the same methods, and again that was romanticised by the coroner, and the way people had, the method was discussed, but the way people were discussing it almost glamorized it and made it look like this was a man at his peace, at his rest. And when we say things like that, suicide does become a good option when you're in a crisis and you feel your life is really dark and there's nothing ahead. That's, you will latch on to that sort of language. It will influence your thinking. Instead of talking about problem solving and about how we just don't know the good things that are ahead of us, and sometimes we don't know the solutions to our problems, and we need to talk them through with people. It's always worth giving therapy a chance, giving the phone lines, the helplines. There's so many things out there for people now that's the message we need to be putting across. When people are in a crisis, this is not what you do. These are the things that and most people who are in that place never act. And people that survive suicide attempts don't die by suicide on the whole. There's lots and lots of evidence about that too. So we need to change how we discuss it. We can of course discuss the reality of it and the numbers, but there's far, 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 far more people who recover from suicidal thoughts than ever die by suicide in Northern Ireland and everywhere. That's the case, and those are the stories we need to amplify, really.
Just on that note, Siobhan, obviously the 3/4, those numbers for the deaths in males it's astonishing, really. But as somebody who has mental health problems and still does to this day, I can always remember that whenever I was younger, that it almost seemed worse, and as I get older, those feelings in terms of suicidal thoughts, people always used to say, when you rang for help, are you thinking of doing anything to yourself? And it used to annoy me more the fact that I was saying, no, I don't want to harm myself. I just want help. I'm not depressed. I'm just anxious, But I heard on a radio article show before that it was all based around mental health, that males don't develop a certain rationality in the brain to a certain age, whereas women develop it sooner. I don't know if there's any facts around that in terms of, is that maybe why more younger fellas than women? Could that be why the figure's so high? Have you heard anything like that before?
Okay, yeah. Well, I've heard variations of it. I think that it's kind of crude to say that males don't develop something. Women from a very early age, we give girls dolls, and they talk to their dolls, and they look after, and they communicate, and they talk about feelings. And if you look at everything, my wee girl's 3. And it's just saturation, whereas the boys are given other things to do, which develops them in different ways. That's what I believe. So
Yeah.
men, and of course the stereotype for the man is that he doesn't talk about his feelings. So the feelings are still there, but maybe there's a difference in the ability of women to work out how they're feeling and then talk about it or get themselves help. Whereas men are told to go and do things, you go and do this and go, so there's definitely a gender difference, but I don't think I just think we need to think about how we socialise boys and girls and help all kids identify what the feeling is and how we can start to change it. And I only really was taught this in my 20s and 30s when I started studying psychology and doing this sort of work. But some of the kids are really good at it now, so we should be doing that, and that will promote that ability that we need to have to work out, how am I feeling? What can I do about this feeling? What can I do to change it? So I'm feeling stressed right now. It's stress. It's not a mental illness. It's another thing we get really confused about. Stress and pressure, they will affect our mental health. But we can cope with a certain amount of that too, if we work out what it is. But we need to be able to sort of settle ourselves or self-regulate, as we would describe it, regulate it, and then think, right, how am I going to sort this out? And girls seem to be better at that, and they're expected to talk to other people. And we ask wee girls questions about their feelings more, and so it's not just a brain biological, it's how we interact with kids. But there's a lot of data now actually showing that, we talk about maturity, and the brain isn't fully developed until we're in our 20s. I think that's kind of, I've heard a lot of talk like that, that maturity isn't really achieved until that point. And teenagers need more sleep, for example. So different things are going on there biologically, and we shouldn't, that impulsivity is part of being a teenager, whether you're a fella or a girl or anywhere in between. That impulsivity is going to be there as a teenager and even in our early 20s. And because we're not sort of, we're not finished settling down and working out where we want to be in life until much later, I think we're just more prone to, if a relationship breaks up in our teens, it can feel like the end of the world because we just don't have that experience. We don't realize that life's going to be full of ups and downs, and whenever we look at the screen and the phone, and everything's perfect there. Everybody else is perfect. We need to be like that. And I think that's another big problem that we have. We're comparing ourselves constantly to other people, and we're getting such a false view of the world through social media and online generally. And when I was growing up, it was all about magazine photographs being airbrushed. And did you know they were airbrushed? And this realization was amazing whenever it hit you when you were a teenager. Now kids, it's really hard to know what's been airbrushed, what's been changed. They're presented with a really artificial view of the world that's not reality at all. And gosh, with COVID, our opportunities to connect on a face-to-face basis and see the real world it's just reduced so much. So that's very damaging. And we can start to feel like failures if that's what we're constantly looking at or comparing ourselves against.
Yeah.
So long answer.
Same respect of you saying, and came up in discussion there about the 13 Reasons Why program and maybe kids being highlighted too much. Going forward, because I know that whenever it happened to me and I didn't know how to deal with it, what is the right time that you sort of then implemented into like maybe the schools in terms of teaching kids how to deal with mental health and what the signs are? Because for somebody that originally starts to feel like this, it's the worst thing ever in the world, and they don't know what's going on in their brain. Can you maybe give that information too early or too late? Is there any research to suggest when kids should be taught about that?
It should go right from the very, very start. I mean, I'm talking zero, like a wee baby, and we sort of do it naturally. We go, oh, we pet, you're upset, and we calm you down, and we rock you,
Mm-hmm.
So we're teaching that wee baby to bring itself, or we meet the baby's needs. You're upset because of this, so, and you're constantly teaching the child mindedness. So you're saying, oh, you're grumpy today, or you're sad, or look at that lovely happy face. So those interactions, that's attachment theory and action. That's attachment. So that's what you do before they're verbal. The rocking is so powerful. The sensory stuff, the touch, and if you have a kid who's had trauma, or who hasn't had that, there's part of treatment is to going back and actually trying to recreate that for them. Or even for ourselves, rocking, sensory, soft, all of that can really, really help us if we're in a state of acute stress. So that's a baby stuff. And toddlers, it's about how are you feeling? How is he, identifying other people's emotions, and why is he feeling like that, and what can we do to sort it out? And you're all the time teaching problem solving. Stress is normal and natural, but there's things we can do about it. So what are we going to do? And so I have one of Annabelle's cousins is 4, and she knows if she's so angry that she feels like hitting somebody, she can run away and thump a pillow, and so she can get it out, and that's normal and natural. But she does that, and they teach them that to play skill. Then as you get a bit older, you can talk about goals and hopes and how to cope with failure when things don't work out, and when we're really sad, and when we lose somebody, and how we feel, and what we can do about that, and those stages. And the acute stress response can be really, really scary. I had a traumatic event like about 10 years ago, and I was just sick, and I thought I was going mad. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. I just thought I can't, my body can't cope. I want to go into psychiatric hospital, but it was just the body's reaction to stress, a trauma that I couldn't cope with, and I had to adjust and grieve. Bereavement can feel like that. If you've lost, you just think, oh, I can't. My heart is physically sore. I can't cope without this person, and it can feel like things are going crazy around you. And by knowing that it's just a natural body's response, it doesn't make it any better. But you know that you can get through it, and the more times you go through these things, the more resilient you become, because it does make you a bit stronger. So when the pandemic hit, like, I was really anxious for a long time. Like, I would say about a fortnight. Dreams and horrible just things coming, images and things. And that's just part of an acute stress response to something that's outside of your control. And you have to try and make meaning and process that, and try and come to a sort of acceptance, right? This is what it's going to mean for me in my world, but it's going to be okay. And that's why people were out buying toilet roll, because they were just panicking. We were thinking, oh, what are we going to need? How are we going to react? It's that part of the brain we would call the downstairs brain that just reacts in a state of stress. So I'll go and get a big I have a cupboard full of tinned food down there, and soups and stuff. I'll never eat them, but that's just what I did out of stress, But it's the same thing as I wasn't in my upstairs brain at all. I was downstairs reacting, responding as my body was telling me all this stuff. Now I'm able to write my plans and move forward, but it's hard. It's hard for kids going through this, They don't know when they're going to see their friends again. It's the end of their world, like, it really is.
There's a couple of things you said. You said so much, and that's not a criticism, by the way. That's a good thing.
Talk a lot.
One of the things that's interesting is that I don't have kids. Paul does. Maybe he has this experience. I know that particularly for working class people who maybe both parents are out working, maybe there's only a mummy, maybe there's only a daddy, I don't know. And they're coming home at 5 o'clock, and it took them half an hour to get up on the bus, and they're stuck beside someone, and maybe the person wasn't the most comfortable person to sit with. and then they have the wee child coming in crying at the kitchen while mommy's trying to cook or daddy's trying to cook. And they're going, I just don't have time to be picking you up and mollycoddling you if I'm trying to feed you. And I have to get out to maybe do a second job because we need money and rent's so dear. And like, how do they fit all that in? You know what I mean? Is there some stats that would suggest that working class people kill themselves more, or they experience more negative mental health? Or
but right. It's about being a good enough parent, okay? And you do need to meet the kids' basic needs. I had to hold my child down to brush her teeth. She was screaming, you know. So what do? Like, you allow her teeth to go. You just have to
sounds like my house.
Hi, you have to cook for them, and you have to go away and play. But I'm a single parent too, right? So I have this all the time. Like, it's huge compromises. And the kids are going to be all right because most of the time you're doing your best and you are able to connect with them. And it's one of the things the pandemic's brought for me is more time with her, you know, and she can come into my bed in the morning and have a snuggle and we can chat on the way home in the car and stuff. There's lots of ways of doing it, and you're doing your best. Parents always do their best. I think it becomes difficult when you start lashing out though. Whenever it gets physical or you're shouting and things, that's not good. We all do the shouty bit, like, for sure. But I think, you know, you need to try and create that sort of calmer environment if you can for the child. And then they're going to school, and hopefully in school they've got relationships there and a structure and teachers, and, you know, so it's not all bad. But if there's violence in a home, if there's stress and tension, and that's the atmosphere that child's waking up to in the morning, and, you know, that's when it becomes harmful, or it risks becoming harmful. But it does not have to be perfect, because there's a lot of research, and our student study showed it as well. It's some adversity is good for kids because it teaches them a bit of resilience. So if they go through things, if they go through a cat dying when they're 5, you know, it's a terrible blow. But it does, you know, it gives them something to go on. You know, you can go and say, but remember the time the cat died and you were okay, you were sad for a while, but we made it. You know, so this is good. And it's like it nearly sets up pathways in the brain as well for coping. Kids that are mollycoddled, that are given everything and too closely guarded, have no opportunities to feel. Whenever failure hits, as it definitely will, particularly when they start, you know, friendships break up, fights happen in school, they fail exams, they're rubbish at a particular sport, you know, they come last in the race. Like, this is hard. Kids need to know how to fail. Absolutely. Failure is part of life. So it's not your job to always stop them from going on the slide and stop them from doing it. You just have to be there to pick them up and make sure that you're co-regulating them when you can. But like, some of the advice they give to parents is really, really good. So breastfeeding in the early years seems to help with those connections because of the way the child's been held and all of that. But you can replace it. I wasn't able to breastfeed, so I can talk about this stuff. Like, you can replace it with other ways of that skin-to-skin contact with your child. There's just so much you can do. The stories, you know, to take that thing of reading your child a story every night, that is so good. If you can even get 15 minutes. I follow a clinical psychologist called Joanna Fortune, and she does a podcast on parenting on an Irish radio program, and she's brilliant on the Moncrief show. But she has a book called 15-Minute Parenting. So it's 15 minutes. If you can give that child a 15-minute period of your attention, you know, that's so good for it. And then go off and do what you need to do. So if you can try, and I think that's more realistic than trying to be the perfect parent who's always there, because you need to meet your own needs as well. You know, parenting's so hard. Gosh, it's unbelievably hard, and you're just feeling guilty all the time. And even that then will rub off on the child if you're worried all the time about whether you're doing the right thing or not. So you just have to try and relax on it.
Yeah. Something you said there reminded me of a book I read by Jonathan Haidt called The Coddling of the American Mind. I don't know if you've read it. I'm sure you've heard of it. It's pretty popular for a while. And he reckons, among other things, that the lack of like unstructured play, or the decrease of unstructured play in modern society, is impacting kids' resilience levels, which in turn links into their poor mental health as they get older, because we're taking the difficulty out of their lives, essentially. Well, desirable difficulties. We don't want to make it too hard, but he reckons that this then, basically what he says is kids' lives are getting a wee bit too easy now, so that when they get older and they face problems, they then don't know how to deal with stuff and have never had to overcome anything before. So they're then unable to deal with like a relationship breakdown. I know relationship breakdown is a big one for me. Even I would perceive a small fight as something catastrophic. I would catastrophize it when I was a kid. And maybe that's something that's causing this increase in rates. What do you reckon about that?
There's definitely something in that. It's sort of what I've been trying to say about resilience and about moderate adversities. Actually, in our sample, moderate adversities were associated with the lowest risk of mental illness. Things like abuse and neglect, violence, all of that is really harmful, though really harmful. But yeah, allowing kids to feel play is hugely important. It's how kids learn. It's how they need all the different types of play as well, you know. So they need the sensory play, you know, with they need to be able to get messy. That seems to be helpful for the development of particular things. They need the physical activity as well, so that they're exercising. I think it's 3 hours of exercise toddlers are recommended to have every day, you know. So they need to be burning off the energy, and they need that play even with wee toys, imaginary play, where they work things out, you know, where they show and the building blocks is important. And, you know, there seems to be an association with the development of numeracy skills if children have had lots of exposure to that. So even like using dolls helps build empathy, the ability to understand other people's perspectives. So children need exposed to a wide range of play opportunities, including play with other children and fighting with other weans, and you know, all of that is helping them, prepare them for a world where they're going to get things taken off them, where life's not going to be fair, where people aren't going to want to hang around with them anymore, and they'll have to deal with that. So this is a place, it should be a safe way of them working this stuff out to prepare them for what the real world's going to bring, you know. So giving all the kids medals and competitions and things, I just don't know if that's going to be so helpful. But every child needs to feel like a winner sometimes, you know. And it's whenever there's an environment where the child's self-esteem is eroded so much that, you know, they feel nobody loves them and they don't feel worthwhile. That's the kind of polar opposite of it. And that for me would be a much bigger problem, and we can address that through services and things. The other's just about messages to parents and schools as well. The structures that the children operate within can play a role there too.
A lot of this seems to be conversation is centered around, you know, children more than any other of the 5 or 6 podcasts we've already recorded. But have you seen like an upscale and a raise in terms of parents being anxious about going forward in terms of the kids getting back to school, or has there been any sort of raise in terms of the numbers of people ringing into like the helplines saying things like that there that you've came into contact with?
I don't have any data on that, but I know certainly groups on the ground and schools and teachers are reporting that parents are really worried about their children, about trying to keep up with homeschooling. Mm-hmm. That is a big problem. Children just acting out. So they'll not tell you, ask a child what's wrong. No, I'm fine, I'm grand. But then they'll be aggressive and their behaviour will be all wrong, and it's because something's missing and they can't express it any other way, and they don't have the words to express it. And also they don't want to upset the parent because they know the parent's worried, and that's why they're asking. So there's this sort of cycle thing going on. And children's behaviour that's the way they show you that there's something wrong inside, and parents will pick up on that. And then of course, you know, we're pack animals. When the leader of the pack is not right, when there's something wrong, we detect that, you know, whether they tell us that or not. We know to look at them, and again, it's an evolutionary thing. So it's about trying to keep the pack right and make sure the leaders of the pack are right as well. But parents really struggle with work, working from home for some people is great. For me, it's great, but for other people, it's a real problem, and they hate not seeing their work colleagues every day. And this is really, really difficult. It means they're cut off, but also then they're having to look after children at home. Children they're not easy, and children right now aren't easy because of what's going on. So those are very real risks to mental health. And if you're trying to do a full day's work and look after a child at the same time, you just don't have space. We talk about self-care, like go and take a bubble bath or go for a massage. These things just aren't possible if you've got a really busy life. So we need to be more realistic, I think, about what people can do, particularly if you've all those demands. And then if you've none of that, if you've no family and you really wanted that, or if you're single and you're lonely and you're not seeing people, that's awful. That's really hard for you too. So how do you compensate for that? How do you cope with that? There's all different experiences that are made worse in this situation.
Going forward, for anybody that's listening, in terms of parents, and me being a parent myself, it is quite worrying, because I'm constantly thinking about what could be the ramifications of what's happening and what could be the impact on the children. Is there anything, just in terms of what you've found over the years, could be good advice in terms of how to distract the kids? Because I know my children would say stuff like, I can't hold his hand, or I can't go and see her, and you're talking about like my aunts or whatever, because they might make me sick. How do you then sort of get them past that, in a sense, because they may be afraid of stuff that before, maybe 2-3 months ago, was completely normal? Is there anything that you can sort of do to counteract that, in a sense, to distract their minds from that, and sort of, because they've been programmed in a different way now to behave?
Yeah, they have, but don't underestimate their resilience either. They're very flexible, and they're at an age where they can mostly cope with this. But there is going to be that anxiety. I think it's helpful to monitor their exposure to information about COVID. I wouldn't. It's not about lying to them. It's about giving them enough information to satisfy their curiosity, and I suppose in an age appropriate manner, and then help them understand what we're doing to solve this issue, what's happening. So it could be useful then, if they're curious about it, well, look up things about vaccinations. What are vaccinations? Where do they come from? What are scientists doing to develop a vaccination for COVID? What is a virus? What does a virus look like? So channeling it in that direction can be quite useful. So it's always very sort of solution focused, and emphasizing the fact that most people will recover, and what we need to do is wash our hands, and these are the things. So I would say just keep it practical and solution focused, and watch the way that you discuss it in front of them, because they will pick up all of that. And make sure that the things like the exercise and getting to see their friends and getting their own privacy and space as well, if they're sort of in an environment where they're inside all the time, giving them a room where they can have their own space and connect with their friends privately is good. And I think kids can go out a wee bit more now, so that's probably helpful. They can have they can meet friends. It depends what age the child is as well. But giving them the information when you have it. So, school's going to be returning. You're going to see your friends again. And then whenever you know exactly what this is going to look like, give them that information too, so that they're kept up to speed with it. But it's difficult, and you're managing your own self-care as well as them. And that's really, really important to know that, they feed off your anxiety. So if you're not getting enough sleep, or if you're not looking after yourself, that's part of their mental health too, is your mental health. It goes both ways, yeah.
You've definitely painted a picture of how important those early years are, and certainly relationships with parents are. Now, I'm sort of long-windedly going to take us a different direction here by saying that I'm a massive believer in conversation, and I've read a lot about how conversation, particularly face-to-face, in-person conversation, can improve emotional intelligence, can improve your levels of empathy. And I worry that we're losing that art, particularly with social media. Now, this is a substitute for having you down sitting coffee or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I worry that our kids now, they're growing up and they're able to sort of abuse people online and talk to people online without actually seeing them. And that decreases their levels of empathy and it decreases their own emotional intelligence. Like they're not seeing what it feels like to them to hurt someone. And I'm wondering if that has an impact, that sort of decline in the level of conversation. And maybe parents don't have time to have conversations with their kids. But how important do you think that is?
Oh, that's so crucial. It's a really good point. I hadn't really considered it before in the way you're saying it, like a conversation, how important that is. And it's not just talking, it's having that some person reflect back what you're saying. It just allows you to make sense of what you're feeling by putting it out there. And writing's the same. Once you see it on paper, brings it home to you a wee bit more. And we know that, like, there's therapies that would use writing, even emotional writing down your emotions and how you feel can help you then start to change things. Conversations are part of that as well. Yeah, I know it's what you do. I mean, the one thing I would say though is we can have more of these conversations because we're not commuting. I mean, I guess you guys are in Belfast somewhere yet.
Yeah.
I'm what, over here 120 miles away. Well, no, that's over and back 60 miles away. But you know what I mean? It would take me an awful lot longer to come to you or you to come to me, and we'd be sitting in a car, whereas I could have had 3 of these sorts of conversations in that same time. So there are benefits as well. But yeah, we need the face-to-face stuff. And more even than that, we need the touch. That physical touch is really quite important, being hugged. And I often wonder, is this going to create like a generation of people who don't do the hugging thing? Do you know the way we like our parents wouldn't have done the hugging thing? Now we're doing it. Are our children not going to do it? But will they be doing the elbow thing? Is that going to be like another way that they'll have community? And are we setting up neural alternative pathways? I wouldn't even judge whether they're better or worse, but are we going to have a culturally different group who communicate in different ways? It's an interesting thought. We're very reliant on it because we grew up with it. Will they be so reliant if it's, if we talk about the new normal and there's less social interaction? Or will those interactions just be more meaningful? Will we be able to choose who we spend time with better, So I can do a half-hour Zoom with a friend who's not a very close friend, but I'll be more cautious and careful about who I meet with because because of the risk there. I choose and spend my time more wisely and value those connections more. I don't know, these are things that need to be studied. There's a lot of studies on mental health effects of COVID and how people respond to lockdown and isolation. But what are the new ways of working that we'll develop, and what are the benefits of those? Because there's always positives with the negatives too. I can go to conferences now. I'm going to a conference in Boston that I wasn't able to go to because it's all going online and I'll have access to all that stuff. And I would say there's other single mothers like myself that wouldn't have a chance of going to these things. Never mind the cost and the effect and the climate change, and all of those issues. So there's things that are happening now that are really positive, and other things that we're going to have to look at.
The thing you said there that I think is really important is about the touch and about how touch is important for intimacy. And I'm not just talking about sexual intimacy, like intimacy between friends and between other family members. I watched a documentary a wee while ago about Japan and about the nature of Japan and their relationship with sex. And it seems that a lot of their men wouldn't really hold hands. They're not big huggers. They lack that intimacy. And it has a devastating effect on their relationships at home. So much so that the women are having to take sort of extramarital affairs to sort of get that intimacy that we as pack animals all need.
Yeah.
So that's something that you're saying there. Are we going to do that elbow thing? I know for me, if someone comes into my house and they want to touch my elbow, it's not enough for me. I need that feel. I am touchy-feely. I like hugging. I like handshaking. And I would be worried for kids if they have to grow up in a world where intimacy isn't really a thing. You can't touch, and because it's really important. Like you said earlier with babies and the skin-to-skin contact. Are we not going to be allowed to do that anymore?
Well, it releases, and a baby and the mother, it releases oxytocin, which improves the flow of milk. So you actually kind of need it to feed the child if you've no other alternative. It's that, it's a real biological thing. It's so, yeah. And when you said about the Japanese, I was thinking of the Italian men will walk around holding hands with their friends, and it's wonderful, But yeah, is it different? Other cultures have different ways of expressing affection, and I don't know if mental health. We know that the rates of mental illness are the worst in the Western world. Like in America, Northern Ireland, Australia, New Zealand, of the World Mental Health Surveys, we all had the highest rates of mental health problems. Oliver James wrote a lot about this. He talks, modern life, basically capitalism causing mental illness. That's the problem. And extramarital affairs happen anyway. I don't know if we're just designed to have the one person for, that length of time. That's hard. Yeah.
I'm saying nothing. I can't.
Yeah, I know.
I can't agree with you.
No, we have to find ways of being monogamous, obviously, to function. But it's a tricky one. It is. It's a really difficult one, and some people sort of need it more than others. I guess if you're, the Dutch had an interesting way around this for COVID. They recommended that people, have a partner that they go to, but they just have one, and that they maintain that. They had a sex partner essentially. If you're single and living alone, then you could pick somebody to be your sex partner, but just not too many people, because then you risk spreading the virus. Whereas we were told, right, if you live in a house with somebody, then you can't go out. You can't. So boyfriends and girlfriends and people in relationships are starting out in relationships where, in theory, supposed to decide whether they wanted to live together or stay apart for whatever number of weeks. And well, I don't know how well that worked. I don't have any data on that one.
See, on a more positive note, Siobhan,
Yeah.
Is there any research being done in terms of obviously improve what can drastically improve people's mental health, or even just general mood? So for example, sport, music. I'll give you an example. Today I was driving over to a job in the van, and I was listening to a song that I hadn't heard in donkey's years, and just for those 3 minutes, it was just as if like there was nothing else going on, that it was just me singing in the van to that song, and it just brings you back to a time where things always seem simpler, that's for maybe like your younger years or whatever. Is there any research to support things like that they would obviously help in terms of people's mood and mental health?
Yeah, loads of research. Music is so powerful. It's so powerful as a way of reflecting what we feel, because music can also make us feel very sad or very happy, or lift us or distract us. And making music's powerful. Singing is so powerful too. And if your brain's wired that way, everybody should have like a little safety plan or a toolbox, and they know that when their mood's starting to go, feelings are starting to feel sad, what can we do to change that? That's something that we should have, and something me and my wee girl are doing lots of. So that's great, but it doesn't have to be music. It could be art. Seeing a beautiful piece of art, creating art as a way of expressing ourselves too. There's lots of different things that allow us to express our feelings and help change how we feel and just give us that lift. And it's good when we can identify them. We talk about like meditation, and it's sort of linked with that. And meditation, you're thinking, you're trying to sort of focus on one thing. And a good piece of music is like a meditation, because when you're thinking about that, you're not thinking about something else. And meditation is really a really good thing to get into, even just spending a couple of minutes every day, just focusing your mind and trying to just be aware of your thoughts as they come. Try and focus on one thing, and then think about what thoughts are coming, And when you do that, you start to become an observer of your own thoughts. It gives you a wee insight into your world. And it helps you understand that just because you're thinking something, it doesn't make it real. Then you can test that, and then start to change it. So music, meditation, football is like a meditation. When you're watching a ball going back and forward as well, it can bring you away from focusing on your own thoughts. But it's helpful just to have something that you do that can bring you that relaxation, that can bring you away from stress and help you think about thinking, metacognition. It's like going back to the toddler stuff. How am I feeling? Why am I feeling? What am I thinking that's causing that feeling? And how can I start to change that? So that's why I would recommend things like meditation. And it's not about sitting a particular way or whatever. It's just about being aware of your thoughts and not letting them control you. You've been in charge of what you're thinking. That's a very powerful thing. If you can get there in some way.
Yeah.
That makes
sense. Sorry, Doc, just while we're on meditation, I would go one further.
Yeah.
I'm not convinced that you can control what you're thinking at all. I'm a meditator, quote unquote, myself. I think what meditation does help me with, a lot of people think it's for relaxation, it's to calm you down. I don't think that that's true. For me, anyway, it's certainly not. I do it because it helps me realize that emotions too are just thoughts. And if the quicker you recognize them, then they don't have a hold of you. So when I stub my toe and I get insanely angry, I know that I have no control over that emotion or that thought because I'm not the author of it. But I do know that it will pass. If I focus on something else, that'll just go away. For the most part, sometimes it takes longer. But I think that that's what meditation does. I think there's too many people focus on how it calms you down. And people think that they can scrub their brain clean when you really can't. The best metaphor I've ever heard for it is meditation allows you to, instead of standing under a waterfall holding the water up, it allows you to watch it go by. That's the best metaphor I've ever had for it. And I can't speak highly enough of meditation. I think it changed my life. Just wanted to make sure that I got that in there.
Although that's great that you do it. Lots of people do it and they don't label it as meditation, but they have something that they do that allows them. But it's awareness for me. But I do think it gives you a little bit more control. Okay, you stub your toe and your body responds, and somebody, tells you they don't love you anymore. Your body responds, but it just allows you to step back and know that's I can start to change this myself. I think there's a bit of control there that it gives you that wee bit of power because you're aware of what you're thinking and what its effect is on you of those thoughts. When other people do things that cause thoughts as well, we're not getting away from any of that stuff. And there's a lot of rubbish things happening in the world right now and in Northern Ireland right now as well that cause a lot of harm and a lot of negativity and a lot of stress for people. But that little bit of awareness of how things are affecting our thinking is really good. It's a really good thing to have. But I think a lot of people are put off by meditation because they think it's some big mysterious thing where, it's associated with Eastern spirituality and stuff, and that can put people off as well. It's just about understanding yourself, giving yourself that space to understand what you think of it. I'm delighted that I wasn't going to bring it up, and then I thought no, because it's such a really good thing to do, and people should dabble in it. And I think once you do it, I used to say I practiced it, and then when I became a parent and life got a bit crazier, I use it. I'm actually using it every day rather than just going through the motions of, I'm talking to myself and adjusting it all the time, to try and keep and stay in control of things and keep the show on the road, so to speak.
That actually brings us into a good way to finish in terms of your relaxation techniques. We usually ask our guests, because obviously your job, constantly talking about suicide and research and mental health, can be quite stressful for you. So obviously, number one, you say you practice meditation. Is there any other relaxation techniques that you use, like in terms of, would you watch much television? Would you do much sport, or would you write? Would you do art?
Oh, I'd love to go back to doing art, and I've all my stuff set up, and I just haven't had time. I love to paint. That was my big thing, and I haven't done it in years, so that's really sad. But I meditate now, a couple of minutes where I just go, right, what's happening here? That's really all meditation is. What I do now is run. I run as often as I can, 3 or 4 times a week. I started with the couch to 5K. Couldn't run the length of myself. It is so good.
So, as we ask the guests usually at the end, favorite movies for relaxing too. So, you go ahead on that. There, you tell me. I'm not going to put words in your mouth.
Favorite movies? I haven't watched a movie in a long time. I've been watching musical theatre with my daughter. So we watched Annie the other day, which is brilliant. You know,
Which one?
Annie. Oh, which
one?
version? It was a 1999 version on Disney Plus. So I'm enjoying that. I love the Sound of Music as well. These are really cheesy, but they're full of happiness and happy songs. Yeah. So yeah, I haven't watched a long movie in a long time. I love Call the Midwife. That's my absolute favourite thing on TV. I just think it's so brilliant. But the story, everything about it, it's a beautifully cast piece, and the mental health stuff, and there's some really powerful, important messages in there. So Call the Midwife, if there was a movie version of that, that would be my favourite movie.
What about, would you do much reading? What would be your favourite book?
I read a book, The Heart's Invisible Furies, to John Boyne, was the most recent book that I read that just moved me so much. It was absolutely brilliant. I would have listened to a lot of Audible books when I'm driving, because I tend, if I try and read a book at night, I just fall asleep. So I used to, when I was driving more, I would have listened to Audible. I really like The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Night, actually.
Love it.
Good book about sort of mental health and topics like that. I think it's a great book. Was it One Day? Was that, it was made into a movie later? I found that good. I actually really like The Hunger Games Audible book. I've never seen the movies. But yeah,
they're not great. Stick to the book.
Okay. The books are really good, really good. Yeah.
He always tells me that the books are better than the film. I think it's maybe because you can paint your own picture in your head of what way.
Yeah, but the Hunger Games book, it really just struck me as a powerful kind of comment on how society is right now. And maybe a lot of that stuff's lost in the movie because it was more cartoonish or something. What I understand of the movie was less real. In my mind, I don't know.
I just think with movies, they're rushed and they have to be made sexy and they have to be made sellable. And you lost a lot of the theme and a lot of the sort of, if there's a social satire element to it, you lose that because these people are paying these actors and actresses big money. They need to make their money back.
Mm-hmm. And movies are too long nowadays. They're almost always way too long. I don't have a lot of patience for long-winded. A lot of people are watching Normal People right now. Can't bear it.
Yeah, he watched it. I read the book.
I loved it. I thought it was brilliant.
I just
it was different. That and I think the title says it all. Normal People. It was just, I just found it very relatable in the sense that there's not really much shows like that out there.
Yeah, but it was painfully slow. I mean, actually,
to start with,
painfully watch these people going through this. Oh no.
I just thought they yap too much in the book. It's like a constant drone, like a millennial drone about this and that, and just screaming, "Get on with it! Just get on with it!"
Yeah,
get on with your life.
Exactly. It's just so, all of that stuff is so tedious. When you're going through it, it's so important, and then afterwards you realize, and some of the people just aren't very nice in it. and there's no closure, or I find it really difficult. I did persist like with 4 episodes, but
Yeah, there's nothing worse when a film or even a book leaves you without an ending, but then in some cases you don't like the ending, so you can sort of think it again in your own head what way you thought that it would have played out. So it can be good in that sense. But anyway, Siobhan, thanks very much for joining us. I'll let you go and get your lunch here before your next interview.
Look, thanks for being so patient with my big red running face at the start. Giving me time to square myself up. Look, it's been lovely talking to you. And if there's anything there that you need more information on, let me know.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. Appreciate your time. Thank you.
Mention on Twitter or something so I can tell people that we've done this.
Definitely we will. Yep.
Perfect.
We will indeed.
Thank you.
Cheers, Siobhan.
Again.
Thank you.
Bye.